Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in week 4 of our Rise Up series, and this week is called Rise Up and Assess Reality. And we're going to be talking about Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 9 through 16. And we're going to be looking at how we as a church, especially in regard to the Family Life Center, need to be focused on the reality of the situation. We're going to look at an example from Nehemiah, what he does to assess the reality of the situation, meaning taking in the facts at face value, what they mean, and not trying to sugarcoat it and make it seem as kind or as good for us as we want it to, but rather taking it in and understanding what it means, what it needs, and what we can do with it from there. So we're going to read together first. I think today's lesson is going to be kind of short in comparison because the context is still the same. But let's read together and then we will dive into that. So starting in verse 9, Nehemiah says, I went to the governors of the region west of the Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent officers of the infantry and cavalry with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard that someone had come to pursue the prosperity of the Israelites, they were greatly displeased. After I arrived in Jerusalem and had been there 3 days, I got up at night and took a few men with me. I didn't tell anyone what my God had laid on my heart to do for Jerusalem. The only animal I took was the one I was riding. I went out at night through the valley gate toward the serpent's well and the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. I went on to the fountain gate and the king's pool, but farther down it became too narrow for my animal to go through. So I went up at night by way of the valley and inspected the wall. Then heading back, I entered through the valley gate and returned. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, for I had not yet told the Jews, priests, nobles, officials, or the rest of those who would be doing the work. And so we see that Nehemiah, who had, and remember if you look back at last week's lesson, he had asked the king for letters of marque, letters of recommendation, so to speak, that would allow him to pass through foreign territory so that he could go to Jerusalem, or what he would call the land where his fathers were buried, his fathers and his father's family were buried. And so now he is he's there, he's in Jerusalem, and we look at verse 10, and he mentions a couple of guys, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official. These are surrounding nations. These are two guys who are in charge of surrounding nations who do not want Israel to succeed. They don't want them to prosper again. They are opposed to Israel in general. And this is showing that Satan has an agenda even at the very beginning of a plan, especially here in Nehemiah's plan. Whenever we want to do something right, we are going to encounter obstacles, and often those obstacles are enemies who rise up to push back against us, because Satan is telling them that it is their job to stop us in doing whatever. That is who Sanballat and Tobiah the Ammonite, that is their role in this in verse 10. Luckily for right now, that is all the mention that they get. We don't see them for the rest of our section today. We will see them later in this chapter, where and they're going to show up again and cause some problems. So the reason we look at this is because you can see that up until this point, Nehemiah had only heard about the problems in Jerusalem. He had not yet seen them with his own eyes. He hasn't told anybody yet, other than the king, that where he's going. He hasn't told anybody what he is planning on doing. He hasn't told them that he's going to rebuild the walls or anything like that. Everything up to this point has been solely between him and the Lord. And he is assessing the situation so that he knows what needs to be done in order to rebuild. Let's just continue looking. He would get up in the middle of the night. He took a few men with him. This is verse 12. And he didn't tell anyone what God had laid on his heart to do for Jerusalem. And he took some kind of animal, a donkey, and oxen. We don't know. It doesn't say. It just says animal. And he rode all over the city to the valley gate, to the serpent's well, and the dung gate. He inspected the walls of Jerusalem through those places and where it had been destroyed by fire. He went to the fountain gate and the king's pool. And then he had to go out of town and actually look from around the city outside to inspect the walls because it was too narrow for him to go inside. And so he's just taking an assessment of what the reality for Israel and Jerusalem is at this point. And that's something that we're going to be talking about in Brother Richard's sermon today. That's what he's going to be talking to us about, is assessing the reality of building a family life center and looking at what it's going to take, what it's going to require of us as a church, what it will require of you as a church member, what it will require of me as a church member and as staff here at the church. It's going to be a lot. There's going to be stuff that we need to assess. And what does it mean to assess reality? Well, it means to look at things from an objective point of view, to assess the reality of it, not to assess the emotional context behind things, not to assess the good picture, but to assess what's actually there in front of us. It's easy when we're assessing reality to focus on the negative, and that's not the goal. Yes, we're going to see negative things, but the goal is not to just see the negative. The goal is to see the difference between the negative and the positive. And so this is not an easy thing for us to do. Naming our own reality, naming our reality is hard because we want to color it in some way. If you're like me and you are an optimist, you can put a spin on anything and make it sound good and make it be good, when in reality it's not. If you're a pessimist, you can take something that's completely neutral or even leaning good and make it sound like a terrible idea. Make it sound like it's the worst thing that's ever happened. So that's not what assessing reality is. It's not putting a spin on things. It's saying what it is in reality. So Nehemiah is inspecting those walls and had to name his reality. He had to look at it and go, well, the walls have been broken down. These are the ones that are broken. This is what I need to look at. This is what we need to repair. And we can often be tempted to shift the responsibility off of ourselves from a personal point of view onto the community or even our nation. But we need to stay focused, at least in this context, on the personal application. What can we do in regard to responding to Nehemiah here? So, like I said, there's not a whole lot of context that I have. Remember that Nehemiah is just going at this point. He hasn't started rebuilding. He hasn't called anybody to rebuild. So we're just going to dive into our questions this week. I hope that these are helpful to you. And then we will just have a very short lesson today. So I want you to think about a time when you had a task or a season of change that required you to begin by naming the reality, by looking at the situation and assessing it and saying what it is. What were your circumstances? Were they good? Were you in a generally positive place? Were you in a generally negative place? For me, one thing that I can think of is starting Kids Praise. There was a scheduling issue between choir and Kids Praise and trying to figure out a good place for it. And I had to sit down and just say, I want this to succeed, and Brother Richard helped me go through this. And we were at the time having it at 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoons, and the fact of the matter is, it wasn't happening. There weren't kids showing up for Kids Praise. It's really hard to have a children's music ministry when you don't have children showing up. But I had to assess the reality and go, okay, this isn't working. We need to make a change. And we came up with a plan, and we executed the plan earlier this fall, and it's been great. The choir has been super accommodating and super kind and gracious in moving choir rehearsals to Sunday afternoons rather than having them on Wednesday afternoons, or Wednesday evenings rather, so that we can have Kids Praise during the normal Wednesday night activity time for our kids, and it's been wonderful. We've had just a great result with the kids. I'm very excited for what the future holds because of Kids Praise. But that's one thing that's one of the ways that I had to assess reality. I couldn't just sugarcoat it and go, oh well, we've had 2 here and 2 here, and it's working, and kids are they weren't, and that would be overly sugarcoating it. That would be trying to put a spin on it that is so far out of left field that it doesn't work ever. But at the same time, I couldn't be a pessimist, even though it would have been possible, and say, well, it's not working this time. There's no way it'll ever work. And there's no way the choir would cooperate. And so I'm just going to get rid of Kids Praise. I couldn't do that either. I had to actually be realistic in my assessment of Kids Praise. And we were. So what are the tensions that we face when we assess our situation during seasons of change? Well, we have what we want, we have what we perceive other people want, and we, if you're like me, in the fact that you want to please everybody and you want to try to keep everybody happy at the same time, you deal with a lot of struggle and tension between you and other people. If you're somebody who knows what they want and they can't quite get what they want, you have this tension within yourself. For me, like I said, the biggest tensions I face are tensions between my obligations or my felt obligations to other people. So if if a family member tells me, hey, I'm going to be in town, let's do something, but I have stuff already planned and will not be in town, I have this tension because they're my family and they're going to be in town last minute. And this actually happened with my brother. My brother was in town this past weekend from North Carolina, and I was out of town with senior adults in Glen Rose, and I didn't get to see my brother. He called me yesterday just to talk about fishing stuff, but not to actually talk about anything. But anyway, I wanted to see my brother. I couldn't see my brother because I had this other stuff going on. But that's a tension for me because I want to make everybody happy, including myself. And so that's not necessarily a season of change, but that's where my tension usually lies. Is, am I disappointing someone else, and am I letting someone else down if I pursue what I want to pursue? So if I were to, just say, actually, we're going to cut our trip short so I can go see my brother, that would be very wrong and not wise of me to do that. Yes, I want to see my brother, but I'm not going to cut the whole trip short just because of what I want. So in naming our own reality during seasons of change, a common reaction that we have is to not be honest with ourselves. We will fib, we will lie, we will deceive ourselves. Normally, we lie to ourselves to make it sound as good as possible for us, the situation. So we'll take a bad situation, try to put a good spin on it, and make it a kinder explanation or situation than it actually is in reality, because we don't want to address things that need work. Have you ever been in an argument with somebody and you've said, I feel this, this, and this, and we're not meeting these things, and they go, I don't see it that way. I think we're fine. They are deceiving themselves, trying to deceive you and say, the problems that you're seeing aren't actually there. We do this to ourselves, brothers and sisters, where we try to make things sound as good as possible, so we don't have to worry about them. I'm guilty of this. I'm pretty easygoing when it comes to decisions and things and feelings. I'm usually pretty easygoing, and so I don't get my feelings hurt very easily. But that also means that when it comes time to have an argument, sometimes I will just go, I'm oblivious to the problem because I'm so easygoing. I don't see the problem a lot of the time. And that causes much consternation whenever my wife and I have a disagreement about something and I'm going, why is there a disagreement? And she feels very strongly about something and I feel very not strongly about that thing. So we do this because we want to make ourselves feel good. We want to see a goal accomplished, but we don't want to meet hard situations head on. And so, as we consider our participation in Rise Up, I want you to talk about this with your family. What are your what concerns you about addressing your current reality, not the church's reality, not some other family's reality, but your personal reality with you and your family? Talk to them about it. Go through what your concerns are. What's your concern with your contribution amount? What's the concern with how long you're planning on contributing? Talk about these things. We need to talk about these things. It's good for us to get them out in the open so that they're talked about, so that we can all be on the same page and have a united front, so that when we look next week at when trial comes in the midst of all of this, we won't be shaken by what is going to be happening. Now, next week, we are going to be looking at Rise Up and Do the Work, and we will be covering almost 4 whole chapters of Nehemiah. It will be very quick and rapid. I'm going to do my best to summarize that. But like I said, this week's is fairly short compared to most of our lessons. So I hope it's been good for you. I hope it's encouraging for you as we look at assessing our own personal realities when it comes to the Rise Up series. I know it's been helpful for me. I hope it is for you. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.